And, you know, something that I really have been thinking about lately with this idea of these narratives, as you say, you know, it's like, you know, when you think of somebody who is overly emotional, you know, overly
Hmm.
reactionary to the life around them, you could almost describe that person as somebody who is more inclined to believe the stories that their mind tells them, right? So, like, they're walking around and all of a
Yes,
sudden somebody says something, and their mind
yes,
makes
and
up
they're
this incredible narrative that
Mhm.
what they have just said means this, and that means that I am hurt. And because I am hurt, I
Yes.
now react in an emotional way, right? Now, what I'm interested in is for somebody out there, you know, if somebody's listening to this podcast, they're probably already at the stage where they're willing to accept that I'm trying to better myself, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to change the narratives that I tell myself. And so they
Yes.
can already understand this idea.
Yes.
But to somebody who we would call an overly emotional person, somebody who is so
Mhm.
engrossed in the stories that they tell themselves, what's the
Uh,
way out for
Been
them?
there,
Like,
done
how do
that.
you
Yeah.
get them to that point where they can understand, like, how do you rationalize to a person like that, that listen, you've got to understand that you're believing these stories and you don't have to believe certain stories.
Um, I think that's. I think we may say at this point that some people just don't want to get there. I mean, certain people are, as you said, overly emotional or kind of caught up in their own stories, and they just Stoicism doesn't appeal to them. So
Mm.
that's another kind of calibration or transformation or reinterpretation between Reformed Stoicism today and ancient Stoicism. That I don't think that Stoicism is kind of one size fits all answer for everyone. There are, I believe, certain people who will simply not accept Stoicism because it doesn't it doesn't suit, it doesn't fit in their mindset, in their way of being, and they will go about their lives their way, and they will be maybe not happy, but they'll try to flourish on some different path. So and I think that in the 21st century, again, we as Stoics, we shouldn't impose on everyone the Stoic dogmas. I mean, certain people will obviously disagree with them, and will just go about their lives. So that's one thing to say. I think that we need to accept and agree that Stoicism is not for everyone. That it requires certain willingness to take on this message. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if someone wants to, and majority of folks, I guess, will benefit from Stoicism. Basically, I did benefit myself greatly, of course. I think the key message here is to kind of identify what those narratives are, because when we use the word narrative, we kind of open ourselves to the to this thinking that there's this kind of voice in our head, and I don't mean like psychological problems and hearing voices, that kind of stuff, but there is this kind of a voice that is with us all the time. I mean, from the time we wake up in the morning till we go to bed, that kind of narrates everything, interprets everything, kind of puts an angle on everything that happens. And this is basically it. This is this kind of stream, not stream of consciousness, but stream of thoughts, stream of narratives that makes up this kind of voice in the head. And the big thing is to kind of identify that, and then realize that we are not that we are something else than that voice, right? That there is a kind of that there is a gap between myself, whatever that is, and this voice, this narrative, that I do not have to rely on it all the time, that I don't have to trust it all the time, that I can disobey this voice, that I can try to control it. So this is the first thing, I believe, the realization that I'm not subdued, that I'm not inferior to that voice, that I can try to control it. That's the first step, and I believe it all goes from there.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that listening to you answer that question has really actually kind of cleared my own vision of what it actually means, right? So firstly, I mean, I was even thinking as you were describing how, we just got to accept that some people aren't going to like this philosophy. They're not going
Yeah.
to align with it. You know, it kind of brings me to the idea of aligning with nature and understanding that there's a necessity for everything within this cosmos, right? Like, so there's always going to be people who absolutely just get it. There's always going to be people who don't, you know, like it's kind of like, we don't have to impose these ideas on people. We just have to accept and understand that this is,
Yes.
you know, you can't force somebody to see something that you see. They have to come to that decision on their own. Uh, and also, you know, you kind of mentioned that, you know, you have to first understand that it is a narrative, and that might be the key,
Yes.
right? So for somebody out there, if you can't get to that point where you agree and understand and see that you are living
Yes.
out a narrative every single day of your life, then you're
Yes.
not going to see the benefits of changing that. And
Yes.
is that almost, it seems almost like, you know, the superpower given to us by Stoicism, right? It's like, no matter
Kind
what
of. Yes.
happens to you,
Yes.
you can change your narrative to make it
Yes.
work for you. That's kind of the idea of aligning with fate, right? Like, or like loving your
Sometimes
fate.
it might be difficult or even very difficult, but yeah, that's basically the message, that
Yeah.
we depend on our narratives, not on the facts. So yeah, that's the thing here. About what you said earlier, the thing is that I mean, we in the modern time, in Reform Stoicism, and in today in general, we need to accept that people are far more diverse than what the ancient Stoics tended to think, right? I mean, in my view, they were kind of pushing a more universal, as I said, one size fits all kind of answer. That everyone needs to take on these rules and everyone will be happier with them, and that there will be no conflict at any point. I believe that's something we can't coherently believe in today. I mean, that's one of the premises here. And what you said about the narratives, yeah, I believe that's a fine criterion here, right? That if someone is not trying to, that this kind of tells a Stoic or aspiring Stoic from someone who is not an aspiring Stoic at all, that we need to try to negotiate and navigate with the narratives we have. If someone is not willing to do that, they will not follow the Stoic way. That's basically the point of divergence here.
And you used the word negotiate. That's exactly the word that I've used with you know, even with my coaching clients and stuff. It's like, something will happen to you and you will immediately come up with a story in your mind about exactly what that means. At the
Yeah,
start,
this is the perfect description. Something happens, then
hmm,
1/4 of a second passes, and then
yeah,
you are ready with a story in your head. And the whole
yeah,
point is that we need to, as you sure know,
hmm,
we need to kind of invest in this gap between fact and the story, and from
yeah.
there everything takes on.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that it's going to be a quick process, but I have found for myself at least that
Mm-hmm.
the process is less of an immediate gratification. It's more of a long-term negotiation with those
Yeah.
stories. Coming back to that word, it's like, you know, at the start, it might be really hard for you to change that story, as it is for many people, because you've lived with that story your whole life, right?
Yeah.
So you can't just expect it to
Yes,
immediately go away.
which is what psychotherapy teaches us, that it takes years to change.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So over time, you might say, okay, I'm willing to give you, you know, maybe we'll go 50-50 here. I'll believe you halfway. And then the other halfway, I will try and change my reaction to this story. And then maybe next time the story only takes up 40%, and then 30%, and then 10%, until you're
Yes,
able
and
to more clearly.
then you slip back to to 0 to 100%, and you have to start all over. I
Yeah.
believe that what we are talking about right now is another way to fairly characterize the way of Reform Stoicism. That is that we accept that it is a process. It is not, I mean, there is this element of epiphany, for example, when we realize that division into things in our power and not in our power, when we realize that we live by narratives and the stories and not by facts themselves. There is this kind of moment of epiphany, yes, But basically is just the beginnings. The process is much harder and much longer. And it's not true, I think, that once you, and this is again something that the ancients might have believed in, at least on some reading, that once you get there, once you become a Stoic, then you will be a Stoic for the rest of your life. I do not think that way. The risk of of falling down and the risk of failure is always there, and then you start the whole process all over, because it's all about the stories. It's how we are used to think about ourselves, how we are used to tell this story that goes on and on in our head. So we can change that, but it is difficult. It's a habit we need to change.